The sirens were getting louder. 3 police cars, a fire truck, and an ambulance raced down my quiet suburban street. I watched from my kitchen window as they pulled up to my house. My house. The one I had saved 15 years to buy. The one where I had built a perfectly legal fence just 2 weeks ago. My neighbor Corinne stood on her front porch with her arms crossed and a smug smile on her face. She was talking to the first officer who approached her, pointing dramatically at my property like she was reporting a crime scene. I walked outside in my pajamas, completely confused. The lead officer approached me with a serious expression. "Sir, we received a 911 call about an emergency situation involving your fence." I stared at him, then at Corinne, then back at him. That was the moment I realized this woman had just weaponized the emergency services against me. And that was the moment I decided to end this war once and for all. Let me take you back to where this all started. 3 months before the sirens and the drama and the revenge that changed everything. I had been house hunting for 2 years. Every weekend, driving through neighborhoods, scrolling through real estate websites, dreaming of the day I could finally call a place my own. At 34 years old, I had saved every penny I could. No fancy vacations, no expensive cars, just me, working 2 jobs and putting money away for the house that would change my life. When I first saw 1247 Maple Street, I knew it was the one. A beautiful 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch, sitting on half an acre of perfectly manicured lawn. The previous owners had taken incredible care of the place. Fresh paint, updated kitchen, hardwood floors that gleamed in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. The neighborhood seemed perfect too. Quiet streets lined with mature oak trees, children riding bicycles, neighbors waving to each other from their front yards. It felt like something out of a movie about the American dream. I put in an offer that same day. When they accepted it, I literally cried in my car in the real estate office parking lot. After 15 years of apartments and roommates and noisy neighbors, I was finally going to have my own space, my own sanctuary. Moving day was everything I had imagined. Friends helped me carry boxes and furniture up the front steps. We ordered pizza and sat on the porch as the sun set, talking about all the projects I wanted to tackle. Maybe a garden in the backyard. Definitely some new curtains for the living room windows. That was when I met Corinne. She came walking across the street around 7 in the evening, carrying what looked like a casserole dish. I was excited to meet my first neighbor. I imagined we might become friends. Maybe she would invite me to neighborhood barbecues or holiday parties. "You must be the new owner," she said, but her smile seemed forced, rehearsed. I'm Michael. Nice to meet you." "Corinne Thompson. I live right there." She pointed to the house directly across from mine, a perfectly maintained ranch style with not a single blade of grass out of place. She handed me the casserole dish. "Tuna noodle casserole. Welcome to the neighborhood." I thanked her and invited her to sit on the porch for a few minutes. That was my first mistake. Corinne spent the next 30 minutes telling me about neighborhood standards and property values, and how important it was that everyone maintained the same level of quality in their homes and yards. She pointed out that my mailbox could use a fresh coat of paint. She mentioned that the previous owners always kept their grass exactly 2.5 inches tall. She asked if I planned to pressure wash my driveway before winter. I nodded politely, thinking she was just being helpful. Maybe a little particular about appearances, but harmless enough. "Well," she said, standing up to leave, "I'm sure you'll fit right in, as long as you follow the unwritten rules that keep this neighborhood so beautiful." Unwritten rules. That phrase stuck with me as I watched her walk back across the street. She turned around twice to look at my house before disappearing inside her own. I ate the tuna casserole that night while unpacking boxes in my living room. It was not very good, too much mayonnaise and not enough seasoning, but I appreciated the gesture. I had no idea that Corinne Thompson was about to make my life a living hell. The problems started small, so small that I almost missed them at first. 3 days after I moved in, I found a handwritten note tucked under my front door windshield wiper of my car. Your garbage cans are still out from pickup day. Please remember that cans should be stored out of sight within 24 hours of collection. Thanks, a concerned neighbor. I looked at the note, then at my garbage can sitting beside my driveway. It was Tuesday afternoon. Garbage pickup had been Monday morning. I had been at work all day and simply had not thought to bring them back to the garage yet. I shrugged and rolled the cans back to their spot behind the house. No big deal. 2 days later, another note. The landscaping border along your front walkway needs weeding. Overgrown areas can attract pests and lower neighborhood property values. Please address at your earliest convenience. This one irritated me more. The weeds she was referring to were maybe 6 dandelions growing along the edge of my flower bed. I had noticed them and planned to pull them over the weekend. I started paying more attention after that, and that was when I realized Corinne was watching me. Every morning when I left for work, she was standing at her front window with a coffee cup in her hand. Every evening when I came home, she was in her yard doing some kind of maintenance work that positioned her perfectly to observe my property. When I mowed my lawn on Saturday morning, she came outside to water plants that clearly did not need watering, positioning herself where she could watch my every move. When a delivery truck brought a new bookshelf I had ordered, she appeared on her porch within minutes, taking note of the package and the company name on the truck. One evening, I caught her taking photos of my house with her phone. I was in my kitchen making dinner when I saw the flash through the window. I looked outside and there she was, standing on the sidewalk in front of my house with her phone raised. When she saw me looking, she quickly put the phone away and pretended to be checking her mailbox. That was when I realized this was not normal neighbor behavior. This was surveillance. The next morning, I found another note. This one was longer and more demanding. Your outdoor light fixture above the front door is not historically appropriate for the architectural style of our neighborhood. The previous owners maintained period-correct fixtures that complemented the colonial aesthetic. I strongly encourage you to replace this modern fixture with something more suitable. I have included some suggestions. Attached to the note were printouts from home improvement websites showing light fixtures that cost over $300 each. I crumpled up the note and threw it in the trash. Then I called the previous owners, who I had stayed in touch with during the buying process. "Did you ever have problems with the neighbor across the street?" I asked. There was a long pause. "You mean Corinne? Oh, Michael, I should have warned you about her. She made our lives miserable for the last 2 years we lived there, constantly complaining about everything we did. We were so relieved to move away from her." "What kind of complaints?" "Everything. Our car was the wrong color for the neighborhood. Our Christmas decorations were too bright. She called the city on us 3 times claiming we were violating noise ordinances because our dog barked during the day while we were at work." My heart sank. Did you ever find a way to deal with her? "We tried being nice. We tried ignoring her. Nothing worked. She has this idea that she gets to control what everyone else does with their property. I think she believes the whole neighborhood belongs to her. That night, I researched Corinne Thompson online. What I found made my blood run cold. She had filed formal complaints with the city against 4 different neighbors over the past 5 years. Noise violations, property maintenance violations, parking violations. Most of the complaints had been dismissed, but the process had cost those neighbors time, money, and stress. She had also left negative reviews on local business websites for contractors and landscapers who had worked in the neighborhood, claiming they were disruptive and unprofessional. This woman was not just an annoying neighbor. She was a neighborhood terrorist who used official channels to bully anyone who did not submit to her vision of suburban perfection. As I sat in my living room that night, looking out at her house across the street, I made a decision. I was not going to be her next victim. I spent the next 2 weeks researching local zoning laws, property regulations, and homeowner rights. What I discovered was enlightening and empowering. My property was clearly defined by a professional survey that had been completed during the home buying process. I owned every square inch up to the precisely marked boundaries, and according to city ordinances, I had every legal right to build a fence up to 8 feet tall anywhere within those boundaries, as long as I obtained the proper permits and followed construction guidelines. I called 3 different fencing contractors for estimates. I wanted something solid, attractive, and permanent. Something that would give me privacy and peace of mind while staying well within legal requirements. The contractor I chose was a local company with excellent reviews and 20 years of experience. David, the owner, came out to walk my property and discuss options. 6 feet tall, cedar privacy fence with steel posts, he recommended. We will set it back 6 inches from your actual property line just to avoid any potential disputes. Professional installation, 10-year warranty, all permits included. How long from start to finish? 2 weeks for permits, 3 days for installation. I signed the contract that afternoon. The permit approval process was smooth and straightforward. The city inspector who came out to verify the plans was professional and thorough. He confirmed that the fence location was completely within my property boundaries and met all local requirements. You should not have any problems with this, he told me. Everything looks good. I was excited. For the first time since moving in, I felt like I was taking control of my own space. No more surveillance from across the street. No more notes about my property maintenance. Just a beautiful, private yard where I could relax and enjoy my home. The morning the surveyors arrived to mark the fence line, Corinne appeared outside within minutes. She marched across the street in her bathrobe and slippers, coffee cup in hand, demanding to know what was happening. "Excuse me," she called out to the surveyor. "What exactly are you doing on this property?" "Marking fence lines, ma'am. Property owner is having a fence installed." Corinne's face went red. "A fence? What kind of fence?" I came outside to handle the situation myself. "Good morning, Corinne. I'm having a privacy fence installed along my property boundaries." "You cannot do that," she said immediately. "It will ruin the open aesthetic of the neighborhood. It will block sight lines and make the area feel closed off." "Actually, I can do that. I have all the proper permits and the fence will be entirely on my own property." "I do not care about permits. This is about community standards and property values. A fence like this will affect everyone who lives here." The surveyor looked uncomfortable. I thanked him for his work and asked him to continue with the marking process. "Corinne, I understand you have concerns, but this is my property and my decision. The fence is completely legal and appropriate." She stood there fuming as the surveyors finished their work. Then she stomped back to her house and slammed the front door so hard I could hear it from across the street. 3 days later, the installation crew arrived. David and his team worked efficiently and professionally. They had the fence posts set and the first sections up by noon on the first day. The cedar looked beautiful against the green of my lawn, and I could already feel the sense of privacy and security it would provide. Karen spent the entire day standing on her porch, arms crossed, glaring at the work crew. She took photos constantly. She made phone calls while packing back and forth. At one point, she came over and demanded to see the permits. "Ma'am, I am going to need you to step back," David told her politely. "This is a construction zone and we have liability concerns. I have every right to verify that this work is being done legally. You can contact the city if you have questions about permits. Right now, I need you to move away from the work area." By the end of day 2, the fence was nearly complete. It looked absolutely perfect. Straight lines, consistent spacing, professional craftsmanship. The gate I had requested for the backyard was solid and secure. Karen had called the city twice during the installation process. Both times, an inspector came out and confirmed that everything was being done correctly and legally. On the final day, as David's crew was finishing the last few sections and cleaning up their equipment, Karen made one last desperate attempt to stop the project. She called the police. 2 officers arrived and spoke with both Karen and me. They examined the permits, walked the fence line, and confirmed that no laws were being broken. "Ma'am, this appears to be a legal construction project on private property," one officer told Karen. "If you have concerns about permits or zoning violations, you need to take that up with the city planning office." "But it is ruining the neighborhood aesthetic. It is lowering property values. There has to be something you can do." "No, ma'am, there is not. Private property owners have the right to make improvements within legal guidelines." As the police officers left and the construction crew packed up their tools, I stood in my backyard for the first time behind my beautiful new fence. The silence was incredible. No more feeling like I was being watched every time I stepped outside. No more anxiety about whether my lawn mower pattern was straight enough or my garbage cans were positioned correctly. For the first time since moving in, I felt like I was actually home. But I should have known that Karen was far from finished with me. For exactly 1 week, my life was perfect. I would come home from work each day and go straight to my backyard. I grilled dinner on my new patio set. I read books in my lawn chair. I worked in the small garden I had started along the back fence line. For the first time since buying the house, I felt like I could actually relax and enjoy my property. The fence was beautiful and functional. The cedar had already started to weather to a lovely silver-gray color. The gate worked smoothly and securely. David had done excellent work, and I had received compliments from several neighbors who appreciated the craftsmanship. But Karen was not done with me. I could see her from my upstairs bedroom window, standing in her backyard near the fence line, trying to find angles where she could peer through or over the 6-foot barrier. She had even dragged a step ladder outside one afternoon, though she put it away quickly when she saw me watching. The notes had stopped, but I suspected that was only because she could no longer easily access my front door without being seen by other neighbors. Then came Tuesday morning, October 15th, a day I will never forget as long as I live. I had taken a vacation day from work to catch up on some projects around the house. I was in my kitchen making breakfast, enjoying the peaceful view of my private backyard through the window when I heard the sirens. At first, I thought they were just passing through the neighborhood. Emergency vehicles were not uncommon on the main road that led to our subdivision. But the sirens got louder and louder, and then they stopped, right outside my house. I looked out my front window and could not believe what I saw. 3 police cars, a fire truck, an ambulance, all parked in front of my house with their lights flashing. Neighbors were coming out of their homes to see what was happening. It looked like a scene from a disaster movie. Karen was standing on her front porch, still in her bathrobe, talking animatedly to the first police officer who had arrived. She was pointing at my house and gesticulating wildly, like she was describing some kind of emergency situation. I threw on a jacket and ran outside, my heart pounding. What could possibly be wrong? Had someone been hurt? Was there a gas leak? A fire I had not noticed? "Sir, are you the homeowner?" The lead police officer approached me with a serious expression. "Yes, I am. What is going on? Is everything okay?" We received a 911 call reporting an emergency situation involving a fence on this property. The caller claimed that the fence was blocking emergency vehicle access and creating a safety hazard for the neighborhood. I stared at him. Then I looked over at Karen, who was now talking to a firefighter and pointing at my fence. "Officer, there is no emergency here. I built a legal fence on my own property 2 weeks ago. All permits were obtained and approved. City inspectors verified the work multiple times during construction." The officer looked confused. "Ma'am, can you come over here, please?" he called to Karen. Karen walked over with a self-satisfied expression on her face. "Officer, this fence is a safety hazard. It blocks sight lines for emergency vehicles. It prevents neighbors from being able to see if someone needs help. It violates the spirit of neighborhood cooperation and safety." "Ma'am, did you call 911 to report an emergency?" "Yes, I did. This fence situation is an emergency for neighborhood safety." The officer looked incredulous. "Ma'am, 911 is for immediate life-threatening emergencies. A legal fence on private property is not an emergency." "But it could become an emergency. What if someone has a heart attack in their backyard and we cannot see them to help?" By this time, the other emergency responders were walking around my property, examining the fence and confirming that there was absolutely no emergency situation present. The fire chief approached us. "This fence does not block any emergency access routes. It does not violate any safety codes. It is a standard residential privacy fence." I could see the realization dawning on the faces of all the emergency personnel. They had been called out on a completely false alarm by a neighbor who was abusing the 911 system for personal reasons. "Ma'am," the lead officer said to Karen, his voice now stern, "filing false emergency reports is a serious offense. 911 is for genuine emergencies only. This call has tied up resources that could have been needed for real emergencies elsewhere in the city." Karen's confident expression started to crack. "But the fence is still a problem for the neighborhood." "That is not an emergency, ma'am. If you have concerns about zoning or permits, you need to contact the appropriate city departments during normal business hours." As the emergency vehicles began to leave, neighbors who had gathered to watch started talking among themselves. I could hear fragments of their conversations. Karen called 911 about a fence. "That poor man just built a normal fence. She has way too much time on her hands." The damage to my reputation and peace of mind was already done. My neighbors had watched emergency vehicles surround my house. They had seen me standing in my pajamas looking confused and embarrassed. They had witnessed Karen making dramatic claims about safety hazards and emergencies. Even though the truth came out quickly, the image of sirens and flashing lights would be associated with my property in people's minds. But Karen had made a critical mistake. She had crossed a line that would give me everything I needed to end her harassment campaign permanently. As I watched the last police car drive away, I realized that Karen had just provided me with documented evidence of her harassment and abuse of emergency services. She had no idea that this 911 call would be the beginning of her downfall. That afternoon, I sat in my living room with a legal pad and began documenting every single interaction I had had with Karen since moving in. The notes under my windshield, the photos she had taken of my house, the complaints about my light fixture and landscaping, her attempts to interfere with the fence construction, and now the false 911 call that had brought emergency vehicles to my house. I realized I had been too passive for too long. I had treated Karen like an annoying but harmless neighbor when she was actually engaged in a pattern of harassment that was escalating dangerously. The 911 call was not just embarrassing. It was a waste of taxpayer resources and emergency services that could have been needed elsewhere. It was also, I discovered after some research, potentially illegal. I called the non-emergency line for the police department and asked to speak with someone about filing a harassment complaint. "Can you come in tomorrow morning?" the desk sergeant asked. "Bring any documentation you have about the incidents." That evening, I walked around the neighborhood and knocked on doors. I wanted to talk to other neighbors about their experiences with Karen. What I learned was shocking. The family 2 houses down from Karen had been harassed for months about their teenage son's car being parked in their own driveway. Karen had called the city multiple times claiming it was a commercial vehicle that violated residential parking rules. It was actually just an older pickup truck the kid used for his part-time job. The elderly couple next door to me had been intimidated into removing a small decorative garden fence because Karen claimed it was not consistent with neighborhood aesthetics. They had spent their own money to remove something they loved just to avoid conflict with her. The single mother across the street had been reported to the city for noise violations because her children played in their backyard during normal daytime hours. Karen had claimed their laughter and playing was disruptive to neighborhood peace. Most disturbing of all, the family at the end of the block had been forced to hire a lawyer when Karen filed multiple formal complaints claiming their home business violated zoning laws. The husband worked as a freelance graphic designer from a home office. There were no clients coming to the house, no additional traffic, no business signs. But Karen had made their lives so difficult with complaints and investigations that they eventually moved away. "We loved that house," the woman told me over the phone, "but we could not afford to keep fighting her complaints and hiring lawyers to defend ourselves. It was easier to just leave." Every neighbor I spoke with had a similar story. Karen had systematically harassed and bullied multiple families in the neighborhood over the past several years. She used city complaint systems, police reports, and other official channels to force people to comply with her personal vision of how the neighborhood should look and function. I was not her first victim. I was just the latest in a long line of neighbors who had been targeted by her obsessive need to control other people's property. The next morning, I went to the police station with a thick folder of documentation. Officer Martinez, who handled harassment complaints, listened carefully as I explained the pattern of Karen's behavior. The 911 call yesterday was the final straw, I told him, but it is part of a much larger pattern of harassment that has been going on for months. He reviewed the notes, looked at photos I had taken of Karen surveilling my property, and read statements from neighbors who had agreed to document their own experiences with her. "This is definitely harassment," he said. "The false 911 call is particularly serious. That is considered misuse of emergency services, which is a misdemeanor offense." "What are my options?" "You can file for a restraining order based on the harassment pattern. You can also file a formal complaint about the false 911 call. Both processes create an official record that will help protect you if she escalates further." I filed both complaints that morning. The restraining order process required a court hearing, where I would present evidence of harassment and request that Karen be legally prohibited from contacting me or interfering with my property. The complaint about the false 911 call would be investigated by the police department and could result in criminal charges if they determined that she had knowingly filed a false report. But I was not finished building my case. That afternoon, I installed a security camera system around my property. 4 high-definition cameras positioned to capture any future harassment attempts or trespassing incidents. I also started a detailed log of Karen's activities. Every time I saw her taking photos of my house, every time she stood at her window watching my property, every conversation with neighbors about new complaints or problems she had caused. I was building an airtight case that would prove Karen Thompson was a neighborhood bully who used official channels to harass and intimidate anyone who did not submit to her control. The court hearing for the restraining order was scheduled for the following month. In the meantime, I had 30 days to gather additional evidence and prepare for what I hoped would be the final battle in this war. I had no idea that Karen was about to make another mistake that would hand me the perfect opportunity to end her reign of terror permanently. The security cameras were installed on a Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, they had already captured exactly what I had hoped they would. Karen had spent the weekend trying to find new ways to harass me despite the pending restraining order. She did not know about the cameras yet, so she acted with the same boldness and entitlement she had always shown. Saturday morning at 7:30 a.m., she climbed her step ladder and took photos over my fence into my backyard. Saturday afternoon, she walked onto my property to examine the fence posts, looking for violations or problems she could report to the city. Sunday morning, she left another note on my car, this time complaining that my garage door was a different shade of white than my house trim. All of it was captured in crystal clear high-definition video. But the best footage came Monday evening, when Karen made the mistake that would destroy her credibility permanently. I was working late that night and arrived home around 9 p.m. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw Karen standing beside my fence with what looked like a screwdriver in her hand. I parked quietly and watched from inside my car as she attempted to loosen one of the fence posts. She was trying to sabotage my fence to create evidence that it was unstable or improperly installed. The security cameras captured everything: her trespassing onto my property, her attempts to damage my fence, her looking around to make sure no one was watching before she started her sabotage work. I called the police immediately. This time, when the officers arrived, I had video evidence of criminal activity in progress. "She is still on your property?" Officer Martinez asked. She went back to her house when she heard my car, but the cameras caught everything. We reviewed the footage on my phone right there in my driveway. The video clearly showed Karen climbing over the low decorative border onto my property, approaching the fence with tools, and attempting to damage the posts. "That is criminal trespassing and vandalism," Officer Martinez said. "We have probable cause for arrest." Karen's front door was still open, and we could see her watching from her living room window. Officer Martinez walked across the street and knocked on her door. "Ma'am, I need you to step outside. You are under arrest for criminal trespassing and attempted vandalism." The look on Karen's face was priceless. Complete shock and indignation that her actions were finally having consequences. "I was not doing anything wrong," she protested as Officer Martinez read her rights. "I was checking to make sure that fence was properly installed for neighborhood safety." "Ma'am, you were trespassing on private property and attempting to damage someone else's fence. We have video evidence." As Karen was handcuffed and placed in the back of the police car, neighbors came out of their houses to watch. Word spread quickly through the subdivision that the neighborhood bully had finally been arrested. The next morning, I received a call from the prosecutor's office. They wanted to discuss not only the trespassing and vandalism charges, but also the false 911 call from the previous month. "We have been reviewing Ms. Thompson's history with our department," the prosecutor told me. "She has filed 17 complaints and reports over the past 3 years. Most of them were dismissed as unfounded. This appears to be a pattern of misusing city services and emergency resources." The court hearing for my restraining order was moved up due to Karen's arrest. With video evidence of her trespassing and the documented pattern of harassment, the judge granted a permanent restraining order that prohibited Karen from contacting me, entering my property, or interfering with my use and enjoyment of my home. Karen was also required to pay restitution for the cost of my security camera system and legal fees. But the real victory came when other neighbors started coming forward with their own complaints and evidence about Karen's behavior. The family with the teenage son filed their own harassment complaint. The elderly couple reported her intimidation tactics. The single mother documented the false noise complaints about her children. By the end of the month, Karen Thompson was facing multiple charges, multiple restraining orders, and a reputation in the neighborhood that would never recover. The woman who had tried to control everyone else's property was now legally prohibited from interfering with any of her neighbors. 6 months later, I was sitting on my back patio enjoying a quiet Saturday morning when I heard the sound of a moving truck. I looked over my fence and saw boxes being loaded into a large rental truck parked in front of Karen's house. She was moving away. The criminal charges had resulted in fines and community service. The multiple restraining orders had made it legally impossible for her to continue her harassment campaigns. Her reputation in the neighborhood was completely destroyed. But more importantly, other neighbors had finally found the courage to stand up to her. Once people realized that Karen could be held accountable for her actions, they stopped being afraid of her complaints and threats. The family with the teenage son refused to remove their son's truck from their own driveway. The elderly couple reinstalled their decorative garden fence. The single mother let her children play outside without worrying about noise complaints. Karen had lost all of her power and influence in the neighborhood. I found out later that she had tried to sell her house quietly, but word had gotten out about the legal troubles and harassment history. It took months to find a buyer, and she had to accept an offer significantly below her asking price. The morning she drove away for the last time, several neighbors came out to watch, not to gloat or celebrate, but to confirm that the nightmare was finally over. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman next door, brought me fresh cookies that afternoon. I should have stood up to her years ago, she told me. I was just so tired of the conflict, but watching you fight back gave me hope that bullies do not always win. The new neighbors who moved into Corinne's house are wonderful. A young couple with twin toddlers who actually appreciate the privacy my fence provides for their own backyard. They introduced themselves on their first day and brought me a bottle of wine as a housewarming gift. The difference in the neighborhood atmosphere is remarkable. People are friendlier and more relaxed. Children play outside without fear. Neighbors work on their properties without worrying about complaints and harassment. Several families have thanked me for standing up to Corinne when they felt powerless to do it themselves. I learned important lessons from this experience that I want to share with anyone facing similar situations. Document everything. Every note, every complaint, every incident of harassment should be photographed and recorded with dates and times. You never know when that documentation will become crucial evidence. Know your rights. Research local laws and regulations so you understand exactly what you can and cannot do with your own property. Knowledge is power when dealing with bullies who rely on intimidation and false claims. Do not be afraid to use official channels. File police reports. Request restraining orders. Contact prosecutors. These systems exist to protect law-abiding citizens from harassment and abuse. Stand up for yourself and others. Bullies thrive when people are too intimidated or exhausted to fight back. Sometimes one person's courage to take a stand can inspire an entire community to reclaim their peace. Most importantly, never let anyone make you feel guilty for defending your legal rights on your own property. Your home should be your sanctuary, not a source of stress and conflict. Today, I am sitting in my beautiful backyard behind my perfectly legal fence, reading a book and enjoying the peaceful quiet that I fought so hard to protect. The fence has weathered to a lovely silver-gray color. The garden I planted along the back border is thriving. My security cameras keep a silent watch, though I have not needed them since Corinne moved away. Sometimes I think about that first day when she brought me the tuna casserole and talked about unwritten neighborhood rules. I realize now that those rules were never about maintaining property values or community standards. They were about one person's need to control everyone around her. Well, Corinne Thompson learned the hard way that there are actual written rules that matter more than her personal preferences. And those rules protected my right to build a fence around my house and live in peace.